You guys, today we are going to be breaking down the Justin Baldoni suit against the New York Times. It is an 87-page complaint with a lot of text messages. This is not making Blake Lively look very good, as a lot of people are criticizing her and her team, accusing them of editing these text messages that were in her complaint. This situation just honestly keeps on getting messier every single day. I swear there's something new in relation to the situation, and we're going to break down the complaint, like I said, because it is a lot. And honestly, it is changing a lot of people's minds about this whole thing. Justin Baldoni is currently suing the New York Times. His lawyer has hinted that there may be more coming, and maybe by the time I post this, there's already another one. But right now, we are strictly talking about the 87-page complaint filed against the New York Times. Now, Justin is not the only one that is suing the New York Times. His lawyer, on behalf of Justin and 9 others, are suing for libel, false light invasion of privacy, promissory fraud, and breach of implied in fact contract. And they are demanding jury trial. And what they are saying in this complaint is that Blake never wanted to sue Justin or anyone involved in the situation, accusing her of only trying to repair her public image and avoid going any further into the legal process. They wrote, Lively chose not to file a lawsuit against Baldoni, Wayfarer, or any of the plaintiffs, a choice that spared her from the scrutiny of the discovery process, including answering questions under oath and producing her communications. This decision was no accident. First, her administrative complaint is rife with blatant falsehoods and egregious misrepresentations that would have subjected her to dismissal if not sanctions. Second, pursuing formal legal action would have derailed her true objective, an orchestrated campaign to rehabilitate her public image. Instead, Lively filed a request for a right to sue letter with the California Civil Rights Department, CRD, a procedural formality that does not require pleadings, remains confidential unless leaked as it was here, and crucially, does not subject the complaint to discovery. While such a letter can precede a lawsuit, it is clear that litigation was never her ultimate goal. Her real intention was to weaponize the appearance of legitimacy conferred by a numbered legal document to launch salacious, headline-grabbing allegations and reshape her public persona at the expense of the plaintiffs. Lively found willing allies at the New York Times, which uncritically embraced her CRD complaint as fact and disregarded the plaintiffs' emphatic objections. Without even waiting for the response deadline of noon Eastern Standard Time on December 21st, 2024, the Times rushed to publish its inflammatory article, We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine, at 10:11 a.m., nearly 2 hours early. This brazen disregard for journalistic integrity and fairness resulted in an article rife with inaccuracies, misrepresentations, and omissions. I will add, though, that Blake has now sued Justin Baldoni for emotional distress and mental anguish, and in his complaint, they were saying that legal action was not her goal, and well, she is taking it there now. But we are talking about his complaint today, and the complaint is calling out the New York Times, saying that they relied on cherry-picked and altered communications stripped of necessary context and deliberately spliced to mislead. Meaning those texts in Blake's complaint, well, Justin's team is claiming they were altered and used incorrectly, and the Times reporting on them was wrong. And we're going to get into some examples of this because it comes up later in the complaint, but in the complaint we are also seeing that Justin and his team are trying to say that they had no intention of destroying or burying Blake's reputation, showing messages from their group chat, one where Justin says, "How can we say somehow that we are not doing any of this? It looks like we are trying to take her down." His PR crisis manager texts back and says, "They are doing all this themselves and it's really obvious." Justin, in another text, is seen saying, "Things I'm more worried about is that we are planting these stories, which is not true, obviously." There is also a message sent in his crisis management group chat where they send a link where Sony was seen praising Blake, and Jamie Heath responded and said, "So glad Blake was praised. Let her get a win. It would be nice to have a Sony executive praise Justin." Then we get full screenshots of the message that was discussed in Blake's complaint that the New York Times reported on. In the New York Times article, they wrote, on August 16th, Miss Nathan shared the Daily Mail article headlined, "Is Blake Lively set to be canceled?" with reference to hard-to-watch videos and a tone-deaf promotional Q&A. "Wow, you really outdid yourself with this piece," Miss Abel responded. "That's why you hired me, right?" Miss Nathan replied, "I'm the best." In Blake's complaint, we see this text exchange where the Daily Mail article is sent, and then Jennifer Abel texts Melissa Nathan saying, "Wow," and then Jennifer Abel says, "You really outdid yourself with this piece." In the complaint from Justin's lawyer, they say, "The article is predicated on Lively's CRD complaint, which references text exchanges between Nathan and Abel as purported evidence that Nathan planted a negative story in the Daily Mail titled, 'Is Blake Lively set to be canceled?' Lively's portrayal is categorically false, misleading, and devoid of factual basis, yet knowingly endorsed by the Times, which claim to have reviewed thousands of pages of text messages and emails. The smear campaign hinges on an August 16th text exchange in which Nathan allegedly shared a link to this article with Abel. The text exchange shows Abel responding, "Wow," followed by "You really outdid yourself with this one," to which Nathan allegedly replied, "That's why you hired me, right? I'm the best." These messages constitute the entirety of the purported evidence underlying the allegation of a smear campaign orchestrated on behalf of Baldoni. And the text is shown in full, allegedly, where they sent this article and then Jen says, "Wow, you really outdid yourself with this piece," and sends this upside down emoji. And the complaint claims the emoji was important missing context, saying, "Further evidence of the Times' complicity arises from its apparent endorsement of the criminal altercation of these text messages by Lively." After Nathan forwarded a screenshot of the article link, Abel responded with, "You really outdid yourself with this piece," upside down emoji, adding an upside down smile emoji to indicate the sarcastic nature of her message. The upside down smile emoji is commonly used to convey irony, sarcasm, joking, or a sense of goofiness or silliness. They further try to prove how they did not play a part in a takedown for Blake Lively and showed them talking about how she took down her own reputation with more screenshots from the crisis management group chat, where someone said, "We didn't tell Jed to go after the idea that her promo was inappropriate. That happened organically. This is a movie about DV that they wore florals to. This is a crazy way to market this movie." Another text says, like, "Come on, we had nothing to do with that." There was also text of Justin wanting to know if this Blake takedown was them or not, as he texted Melissa and Nathan asking if this Perez Hilton video had anything to do with them. He said, "This is not us, correct? Assuming this guy we brought in would never do this." And Melissa and Nathan said, "None of us would ever do this." Goes on to say that nobody is paying attention to Perez Hilton these days, and says that it's organic. She's blown herself up by her own actions. Though I will say they aren't entirely squeaky clean here, as Jennifer Abel, Justin's publicist, in an alleged statement addressing Blake's complaint, seemed to admit that they did have plans in place to protect Justin against Blake Lively in the event that her HR complaints became a bigger story, but that they didn't have to use those efforts. As she wrote, "No negative press was ever facilitated, no social combat plan, although we were prepared for it, as it's our job to be ready for any scenario, but we didn't have to implement anything because the internet was doing the work for us. Sure, we talked about it, contemplated if we needed certain things, flagged accounts that we needed to monitor, worked with a social team to help us stay on top of the narrative so we could act quickly if needed, and yes, we rejoiced and joked in the fact that fans were recognizing our client's heart and work without us having to do anything but keep our heads down and focus on positive interviews for our client." As the text show, we sophomorically reveled and again joked privately to each other about the internet's feedback to the woman whose team was making our lives incredibly difficult over the course of the campaign. The complaint also shows group chat messages of Justin's crisis management team talking about Blake's publicist and her thinking that they were ruining her, as someone texted a link to an article titled "Blake Lively Fearing for Her Career Amid It Ends With Us Backlash," and someone from Justin's PR management team said, "God, I'm so over this. Am sure Leslie thinks we placed this one as well." And Melissa says, "Yep, and same." More texts later show his PR management team discussing that they have nothing to do with all of Blake's hate, saying, "This is crazy. She doesn't have a good reputation. All of this is organic stuff from real people making TikToks, not bots." The complaint also brings up Leslie, who is Blake Lively's publicist, once again, as they allege that she was seeding negative stories about Justin in the press about him being a predator. The complaint says the article also deliberately ignores that Lively's publicist, Leslie Sloan, of Vision PR, once backed by Harvey Weinstein, seeded stories critical of Baldoni, including that Baldoni was a predator, ahead of the film's release. Sloan did so even while Nathan attempted to cooperate in good faith. We also see messages between Justin's team and a reporter where they were inquiring on the HR complaints, and Justin's PR management team basically said there were no HR complaints in regards to Justin and Blake. There was a guy working on the crew who complained about a younger guy getting a job and there being ageism. That was the only thing that was investigated, but there were no wrongdoings found. And they said there was not an intervention on set or with members of the crew. This would be false to allude to. Blake and Ryan had Justin and his team over for a meeting where Blake expressed all the things she was upset about. This was not Justin versus the team behind the film. It was his team versus Blake and Ryan, more of a contentious meeting. The way it reads now, reads as if it was proper intervention with cast and crew. Not true. We also hear the other side of the claims that Blake was shown certain inappropriate videos while on the set. In response to these allegations, the complaint calls out the New York Times for the way that they reported on this, saying the Times compounded its journalistic failures by uncritically advancing Lively's unsustained claims of harassment against Heath and Baldoni. For example, the article based on Lively's CRD complaint sensationally alleges that Mr. Heath had shown Lively a video of his naked wife, with Lively's CRD complaint even labeling the footage as, "This claim is patently absurd. The video in question was a recording of Heath's wife and baby during a home birth, a deeply personal one with no overtone. To distort this benign event into an act of misconduct is outrageous and emblematic of the lengths to which Lively and her collaborators are willing to go to defame plaintiffs." And they wrote that they also showed her this ahead of filming the birth scene in the movie, and to insinuate it any other way is just wrong. The claims of Justin and Jamie also walking into her dressing room unannounced while she was changing or breastfeeding was also combated with a text where Blake told Justin to come run lines with her while she was pumping. She texted saying, "I'm just pumping in my trailer if you want to work out our lines." The complaint also touches on the allegation that Justin was using the word sexy on set, the complaint said. Likewise, the allegation that Baldoni inappropriately described Lively's character's attire as sexy is exaggerated and misleading. The text exchange between Baldoni and Lively show that Lively had insisted that her character's clothing be much sexier. When Baldoni later used the word sexy, he was just responding to her creative input, not objectifying her personally. Lively set the tone that Baldoni heeded during the creative process. The next thing tackled in the complaint is the intimacy coordinator and the claim that Justin improvised unwanted kissing and discussed his personal intimate life on set. The complaint accuses Blake of not wanting to meet with the intimacy coordinator to plan out scenes, and that Justin met with the coordinator alone and had to relay the messages to Blake, and claim that there was no harassment, and that in talking about his personal experiences, it was only to personalize and develop their characters, and it wasn't this inappropriate thing. We see an alleged text from Justin where he says to Blake, "Just hired intimacy coordinator who I love, will set you up to meet / FaceTime with her next week for intro." Blake says, "I feel good. I can meet her when we start. Thank you though." Justin then texts a female producer saying, "FYI, just want to tell you about this. She seems she doesn't want to meet intimacy coordinator until we start, which may mess up the workflow, but I can still meet with her, of course." The female producer he's texting said that's fine. If she doesn't want to meet her now, you'll just have to walk her through what you and are thinking. The complaint goes on to talk about the contradictions in Blake Lively's CRD complaint. They wrote, "Despite its efforts to craft a distorted narrative, the Times fails to address a glaring contradiction in Lively's CRD complaint. After the execution of the protections for return to production agreement in November 2023, Lively herself acknowledges that the film was completed, marked, and released safely and successfully. While Wayfarer, Baldoni, and Heath disagreed with Lively's rationale for requesting the document, many of its provisions were already standard practice. They chose to comply for the sake of the film and to ensure Lively's comfort. Crucially, Lively concedes that neither Baldoni nor Heath engaged in any harassing behavior following the agreement in November 2023. Furthermore, she admits that her stated concerns were sufficiently addressed at the time. This admission directly undermines her allegations of retaliation and strips her claims of credibility. Without the fabricated smear campaign narrative propping up her CRD complaint, Lively's retaliation claim collapses under its own contradictions, exposing it as yet another ploy to salvage her public image rather than pursuing any legitimate grievances. The next thing tackled in the complaint is the intimacy coordinator and the claim that Justin improvised unwanted kissing and discussed his personal intimate life on set. The complaint accuses Blake of not wanting to meet with the intimacy coordinator to plan out scenes, and that Justin met with the coordinator alone and had to relay messages to Blake, and claims that there was no harassment, and that in talking about his personal experiences, it was only to personalize and develop their characters and wasn't inappropriate. We see an alleged text from Justin where he says to Blake, "Just hired intimacy coordinator who I love, will set you up to meet / FaceTime with her next week for intro." Blake says, "I feel good. I can meet her when we start. Thank you though." He then texts a female producer where he says, "Just FYI," sends the screenshot of his text with Blake and says, "Just wanted to tell you about this. Seems she doesn't want to meet intimacy coordinator until we start, which may mess up the workflow, but I can still meet with her, of course. That's fine if she doesn't want to meet her now. You'll just have to walk her through what you and blank are thinking." The one thing that I will say about this is that it seems she just didn't want to meet her before they started filming. Not like never. So I don't know what happened after this, if she met her on set or if it just didn't work out with this intimacy coordinator or what, because clearly Blake is saying that she didn't like things that were happening on the set. In the complaint, they also talk about Blake Lively taking over control of the production by pressuring Sony into giving her ultimate authority. We see text messages between Justin and his editors where he's talking about the fact that Blake is making her own cut of the film. He texts, "Just curious if you guys have peeked at her cut and if anything has changed." Editor number 2 says, "I have just been told that we are not permitted to look." He said, "Haha, wow, when did that happen?" As per Sony, this evening through, "Wow, okay then, the editors and director isn't allowed to look at an actress's cut. Got it. Well, here we go. We will keep taking the high road." The complaint then calls out the New York Times, saying that they did not paint the real picture of what was going on with Justin and Blake at the time, saying that the real source of conflict between them was the fact that she was trying to take over the film. And in another text message, we see Justin say, "She kicked me out officially from the film now. She's finishing it all. I can't be involved. Music, sound, video effects, everything. I'll make it through somehow. Just need to feel it all." The complaint writes, "Notably absent from the Times narrative is Lively's insistence on obtaining editing privileges and demanding her own version of the film, a departure from industry standards. Even more rigorously, Lively leveraged her promotional commitments to pressure for the release of her cut. Evidence of Baldoni's efforts to accommodate Lively's demands, including a series of text exchanges with editors who were later replaced by Lively in favor of her husband's editor, underscores the extreme lengths Baldoni went to in order to preserve the film's integrity. The Times' willful omission of these critical details not only distorts the truth, but also perpetuates a false narrative that conveniently absolves Lively of her own culpability in the unraveling of professional relationships and the upheaval surrounding the film." More text messages between Justin and his editing team reveal growing frustrations and tension surrounding Blake Lively's significant control over the movie and the editing process. One editor said, "I just hope you love, or at least stomach, the cut that is going out into the world." And he said, "Haven't seen it, can't yet." The film's marketing is then discussed and the blame is put on Blake for how the film was promoted. We see the underlined text where an editor said, "If Blake is so determined to handle the marketing on the movie, then just let her." More screenshots reveal Justin expressing frustration over being sidelined from the marketing strategy he initially envisioned, which was focused on DV and its survivors. And they're claiming that Blake allegedly redirected the campaign away from this focus and exerted dominance over key decisions like she did in the editing process. But I will say that in Blake's complaint, she says that Sony wanted them to promote the movie in this way and provided a document that showed the talking points for the movie that they were supposed to follow, which said to kind of stray away from the DV aspect of the movie. So there's just a lot being said. They also seem to try and show that Justin wasn't promoting the movie the way that he was to be performative, as they include a text where he had sent his editors the amount of women who feel seen, that it's reaching people all over the world, that men are remembering their own traumas and having conversations with their partners. That's why we did this, and it worked. Still the dream team. We even see later in the timeline of events that Justin even wanted a % of the film to go to DV survivors. As the complaint says, Wayfarer partnered with Sony to co-finance and distribute the film. That agreement included at Wayfarer's and Baldoni's assistance a requirement that 1% of the film's proceeds be donated to the survivors of DV. That 1% was ultimately earmarked for the organization No More, with which Baldoni had wanted to partner as early as September 2022. When it comes to the premiere of the film, apparently Justin was asked not to come. He texted his editing team saying, "Long story, but we won't be in the same room. I was asked not to even come to premiere. I can figure it out." They later go on to talk about how Blake took over the movie exactly, starting with her taking over wardrobe. In the complaint, they wrote, "On or about December 31st, 2022, Lively agreed to take on the lead role of Lily Bloom. As part of the subsequent negotiations, Lively was granted an executive producer credit, a title often associated with talent of her stature. Wayfarer did not request that Lively contribute to the film in any capacity beyond her performance and this credit." Then we get into Lively taking over wardrobe. On or about May 15, 2023, principal photography of the film commenced in New Jersey. During pre-production, Lively began to assert control over aspects of the film beyond her role as an actor and outside the scope of her contractual entitlements. While lead actors are sometimes granted approval over the general look of their on-screen character, this authority typically does not include full control over wardrobe decisions without input from the director and producers. Nevertheless, Lively overstepped these boundaries, sidelining the production's costume designer, a seasoned professional with a long-standing working relationship with Lively. Ignoring the director's vision for her character and disregarding the weeks spent by the entire team shopping and thoughtfully crafting her wardrobe in preparation for filming, Lively would send hundreds of images to the film's costume designer during all hours of the evening, pointing them in the direction of the appearance she wanted for her character. The costume designer then had to reshop her wardrobe, far exceeding the allocated budget and diverting time and resources. At one point, Lively insisted that her character had money and could afford $5,000 shoes, which had Baldoni rethinking the entire script that had been worked on for well over a year and had been approved by both studios. Lively also several times refused to participate in wardrobe fittings at the production office, a mere 15 minutes away from Lively's Tribeca residence. Instead, she insisted the costume department pack up the wardrobe department and deliver all her wardrobe items to her. Loading the wardrobe department on trucks and delivering them to Lively's residence for fittings added both time to the production schedule and expense to the film. Two things productions work hard to avoid with careful planning. These demands were never mentioned at the contract negotiation phase and therefore were not included in the budget. Lively herself, having a further obligation to the studios as an executive producer, paid no mind to the budget and the months of planning that had already occurred. Even if Lively had the contractual authority to approve her character's wardrobe, which she did not, a grant of such authority would not and could not imply the right to blow up the film's budget with additional unanticipated costs. In an effort to maintain harmony at the start of their working relationship and to avoid further delays caused by wardrobe conflicts, Baldoni and the studio reluctantly allowed Lively full control over her wardrobe. This concession quickly proved regrettable. On the first day of principal photography, paparazzi captured and published photos of Lively in character wearing her self-selected wardrobe. These images were described as unflattering and sparked a backlash from the film's distributor, Sony. Baldoni received direct criticism from Sony, who voiced concerns about the impact of the photos on the film's public perception. Because if you guys remember, when these first photos came out of them filming this movie, everyone thought that her outfits were not it at all. It is also alleged in the complaint that despite Blake being uncomfortable with Justin, she spent long hours with him and confined in collaborative space of the editing bay before eventually they say that she took over the film and fired the editors and replaced them with her own. Sony later informed Wayfarer that Blake was not going to promote the film unless her demands were met, and there was also a screen testing to see which movie would perform better for audiences, and they claimed that Justin's movie performed way better than Blake's, but they went with Blake's, even though she said that if his performed better, then she would drop this whole thing, but that didn't happen. But they seemed to insinuate throughout this entire complaint that if she did not get her way, then she wasn't going to either finish the movie or she wasn't going to promote the movie. There was always some sort of threat, allegedly. And there was also some drama later because Blake went on to seek out a prestigious Producers Guild of America mark on her producer credit for the movie, a mark reserved for those who perform the majority of producing responsibilities on a film. Despite objections from Justin and the Wayfarer team, who believed Blake had not fulfilled the necessary criteria, she insisted on receiving letters of recommendation from Justin, Heath, and other department heads to support her application. And it seems like everyone ended up giving letters of recommendation because they felt really pressured to. Except Justin and Wayfarer were pretty honest about their feelings towards Blake when they were writing their letter, explaining that they kind of felt like they were doing it because they were forced to. And in the complaint, they're insinuating that in retaliation, Blake allegedly began systematically excluding Justin from marketing decisions, like removing his "a film by" credit and stripping him from promotional materials. He was not invited to any cast promotional events, cast screenings, premieres, photo shoots, or any other cast campaigns. At the premiere, Justin and the Wayfarer team were separated from the main cast. They were assigned to a different theater and instructed to leave immediately after Blake Lively arrived. He was also excluded from the official after party, forcing him to organize and fund a separate after party for him and his team, even though Wayfarer, which is his production company, was paying for both the parties. And then we get into this whole Ryan Reynolds situation, because apparently after Blake felt that she was fat shamed by Justin Baldoni, there was a situation where Ryan Reynolds confronted him. And this was at a meeting that was at Blake and Ryan's house, where at this time she was also presenting them with a list of demands that she had that could no longer happen on set if she were to continue filming. The complaint said Lively's husband, Ryan Reynolds, had aggressively berated Baldoni during a meeting at their penthouse in New York, accusing him of fat shaming Lively, Baldoni, in an effort to avoid further confrontation with Lively and Reynolds and rebuild rapport with his co-star, continued to bend to her will. Reynolds and Lively's inappropriate and humiliating berating of Baldoni, delivered perhaps intentionally as other celebrity friends were coming in and out of their penthouse, was promptly by Baldoni's reasonable inquiry into crucial information needed to ensure safety and avoid injury in a scene. Baldoni, while training for a physical demanding scene in which his character Ryle would lift Lily, asked his trainer, who was introduced to him by Lively and oversaw his training for the film, how much Lively weighed. Baldoni, who suffered from back issues and has multiple bulging discs, made the inquiry to ensure he could safely perform the lift without injury. Unfortunately, the trainer relayed this information to Lively, who then informed Reynolds. The confrontation that followed was so aggressive that Baldoni felt compelled to offer repeated apologies, despite his question being entirely reasonable and made in good faith. Following this incident, Lively refused to perform the lift scene, even though it had already been rehearsed with a stunt double. In fact, Lively threatened to quit the production altogether, despite her contractual obligation. Lively gave Baldoni an ultimatum to either cast someone else or work with her in the way she works. It was her way or the highway. Now, when previously reported, they said that the scene did not exist, but in this complaint, it is saying that it did exist, they just cut it. We then hear more about Blake's requests following the strike that we heard about in her complaint that ranged from Justin not being able to talk about her dead father to not coming in her dressing room without permission, improvising intimacy, and things like that. In this complaint, we hear it from the other side as it states, over the months leading up to the film's release, Lively and her collaborators consistently scrutinized interactions with Baldoni and employed tactics that fall squarely with the definition of gaslighting. This behavior pressured Sony, Baldoni, and Wayfarer into conceding control to Lively at every turn, resulting in her domination of nearly every aspect of the film's production. Lively sets the stage for coercion by drafting a protection letter that intentionally misrepresents the nature of the conversations had between Baldoni and/or Heath and Lively, demands Wayfarer parties sign for Lively to return to work after the industry strikes. Principal photography began May 15, 2024. From mid-June to early November 2023, production was suspended due to the industry guild strikes. When the strikes ended on November 9, 2023, production was eager to resume filming and make up for lost time. That same day, however, Wayfarer received an unsettling and unexpected email from Lively through her counsel containing a 17-point list of non-negotiable conditions that must be met before Lively would return to work. Though Wayfarer disagreed as to the basis for requesting these conditions, which insinuated those demands were the result of inappropriate behavior by Baldoni and Heath, the terms were agreeable and some were already in place. For example, Lively demanded that an intimacy coordinator be present at all times when Lively was on set. In fact, an intimacy coordinator had already been engaged during the first half of production, so Wayfarer took no issue with this request. Contrary to Lively's assertion, it was she who refused to meet the intimacy coordinator to plan out scenes, putting Baldoni in the awkward position of meeting with the intimacy coordinator alone and later relaying scene suggestions to Lively in the intimacy coordinator's absence. Not only defeating the purpose, but resulting in accusations by the Times that before shooting began, Baldoni wanted to add blank scenes that Lively considered gratuitous. In fact, these scenes were proposed by the intimacy coordinator. This is well documented in handwritten notes Baldoni took during meetings with the intimacy coordinator. We also hear more about the incident of Jamie Heath walking in on her unannounced. As they wrote in the complaint, in the CRD complaint published in part by The Times, Lively suggests Heath walked in her trailer unannounced while in state of undress and topless, which is false. Heath was invited into her trailer along with a female producer, Baldoni, and a Sony representative for a meeting requested by Lively. Mr. Heath arrived first to see if Lively was ready for the meeting, and after knocking and being invited in, saw that Lively was breastfeeding. She was not topless, she was having makeup removed from her collarbone while fully covered. Heath asked if they should return at a later time. Lively said no, they could move forward with the meeting as initially planned and would meet them after she finished removing makeup. Roughly 2 weeks later, Lively announced that she thought she had seen Heath make eye contact with her. Heath immediately apologized and said he hadn't even realized he looked her way, in response to which Lively remarked, "I know you weren't trying to cop a look." A reference to this incident conveniently showed up on a document months later, distorted like the others and out of context, in a list that The Times later published as fact. Now we get more into this all hands on deck meeting that occurred at Ryan and Blake's penthouse, and how exactly Ryan Reynolds berated Justin. The complaint writes, Reynolds demanded an apology to Lively for actions that were mischaracterized and demonstrably false. When Baldoni resisted apologizing for what he had not done, Reynolds became further enraged. Everyone, including the producer Lively, had asked production to engage, and a representative of Sony that was in attendance left that meeting in shock. The producer offered that in his 40-year career, he had never seen anyone speak to someone like that in a meeting. The Sony representative mentioned that she would often think of that meeting, and her one regret is that she didn't stop Reynolds' berating of Baldoni. The complaint goes into the list of things that Blake wanted them to sign off on in order for her to move forward with finishing the film, and we read about these things in her complaint, but in this complaint, they said on the very first page of her CRD complaint, Lively inaccurately claims that a list of 30 items was agreed upon during the meeting. This assertion is categorically false. The 30-point list is strategically positioned to appear as if it were a standalone written document. However, no such document was ever presented to Baldoni, the Wayfarer team, or to their knowledge anyone else, whether during that meeting or at any other time, and therefore could not have been agreed to. In reality, many of these items were encountered for the first time in the CRD complaint itself and included references to highly disturbing events that never occurred. The repeated use of the phrase "no more" before each demand falsely suggests that these alleged incidents had previously taken place and needed to cease. This implication is not only misleading but entirely untrue. Baldoni and Heath left the meeting deeply unsettled by the implications of Lively and Reynolds' behavior and the power dynamics at play. Faced with mounting pressure and weighing the financial implications of what shutting down a film halfway through production would mean, Wayfarer made the difficult decision to resume production and finish the film despite fears that Lively was intentionally manipulating facts for her own gain. Now, in the complaint, Stephanie Jones, a former publicist for Wayfarer, was also mentioned as they claim she became entangled in the conflict between Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and Wayfarer. Despite not being mentioned in Blake's CRD complaint, Stephanie filed her own lawsuit claiming that she was swept into what she called a smear campaign, and I talked about this in a previous video that this was another lawsuit that Justin was facing. According to the complaint, Stephanie was let go of by Wayfarer, so she was not representing them anymore, for allegedly leaking confidential information to the Daily Mail, despite direct instruction not to. In the complaint, they believe that Stephanie played a key role in fueling the ongoing public feud between Blake and Justin, and they seem to be wording things as she wanted revenge on Justin and Wayfarer firing her, so she forked up Jennifer Abel, who is Justin Baldoni's publicist right now. She used to work for Stephanie, but then she got fired. So they seem to be alleging that Stephanie so willingly gave up Jennifer Abel's phone with all of these text messages with the PR crisis management team because she was so upset that she got fired. And I will say, like, how Blake got these text messages for her complaint has really confused a lot of people because his publicist Jennifer Abel said that she was not subpoenaed. So everyone's like, okay, well then how did Blake get the text messages if there was no subpoena? But it seemed like there was a subpoena. She just didn't subpoena Jennifer Abel directly. She subpoenaed Jennifer Abel's old company that she worked for, which is the company that Stephanie has. The complaint specifically says Lively's CRD complaint states that she obtained the communications set forth therein through legal process, including a civil subpoena. Lively's legal representatives have since doubled down. The subpoena disclosed and referenced in the complaint was served on Jones Work LLC, Stephanie's company. The internal documents referred to in the complaint were produced and subject to that subpoena. We expect that further details regarding the subpoena process will be disclosed during discovery. Now, this is purely speculation, but I can't help but think that Stephanie, like what seems to be said in the complaint, was so bitter by not working with Justin anymore and Jennifer kind of stealing him away as her own client that when Jennifer was fired and Stephanie was going through her phone, she was seeing all this stuff that did not make Justin and his team look good, and hit up Blake and or her team and said like, hey, there's kind of a story here, and this then caused her to subpoena Jones Work, get the text to make her complaint, because then Stephanie also filed her own complaint using those messages. Just kind of a thought of how we might have gotten here, because truly, how would Blake even know to begin with that text like this could have existed? I mean, I guess you could have like a feeling that people are talking bad about you, but I just feel like she was tipped off in some way, but that's just me speculating. I do think in the end here, there's just a lot of different experiences going on surrounding this film, and right now everyone is trying to either get revenge or save their reputation. It's a total mess is what it is, but That's basically what we have learned from this complaint against the New York Times, that this was the alleged context missing from the complaint they reported on, but we'll just have to see what ends up happening, what ends up coming out. I certainly want to know what you guys think about all of this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I love you guys so much, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye, guys.